Hi, Mark Dias, and for lack of a better word, I'm going to do another vlog. I intended to record some more. I'm off tomorrow. I might record some Game Boy stuff, and I'm sorry that I only have a single video game running at any time. Normally, I like to have two. Well, anyway, I recently read some articles and watched some more videos that really frustrated me. And I've talked about the point before, but I wanted to get a little more in depth into the point. I'm using Catherine as a background for a perfect example for what someone might misconstrue as like an overtly sexist image in video games. And right now it's kind of frustrating that sexism is such a big deal in video games, and why people always get so butthurt about it, and why people always decry that video games are this man-based industry that, always creates helpless women and all this nonsense. It's really strange, and I'm not saying it because it's a guy perspective or whatever, but I want to move this. But it's like growing up, there was a lot of games I had that had very strong female characters and very interesting stories that involved female characters, and I didn't distinguish much in between the difference between the two of them. I mean, you have Metroid, and of course people always bring up Metroid Other M, but Other M really shouldn't even count as a Metroid game. But there are so many good examples of strong female characters, or female characters in lead of games that aren't just pathetic. And the first one that really comes to mind is the kind of switch and dichotomy of games like King's Quest, where really you play as a male character, a female character, and another male character, so on. And in these games, both characters are super I guess romance noveled. Like the girl is this dashing, beautiful blonde-haired woman who can really show her stuff, and then the guy is wearing pompous robes and of course I'll save you, sweetheart. And they're very cartooned ideas of these people, but either way, for both of them, they're both just regular characters, and it's not like they they have these huge gulfs in between the characters. You can play the game seamlessly, and you don't feel oh god, the one where I had to play the girl was so overly feminized or whatever. And or oh, the later King's Quests, were so overbearingly manly and all this stuff. They generated a fantasy world. That's the first part that it makes it. And it didn't matter if you're playing as a guy or a girl. It just was. And then there are lots of other games, and people love saying oh, well, female classes always get these things where they're just in there because they had to put a girl into it because they had to suck up to girl gamers or whatever. This is that's the Barbie game syndrome, where people think that they have to create a game for girls, so they make nonsensical, stupid games. I know a lot of guys and girls who play The Sims. That game I can understand would be fun for both sexes, because it really is a generic game. But overarchingly, you usually find most people I know who play it are women. But the guys I know who play it, that's their thing. But when you have other games where you have these strong female characters, like Valkyria Chronicles 1 and 2, personally, I think Catherine has even though they're incredibly troped, they're intentionally troped because it's almost in parody, but the female characters do have a strong presence. I mean, for fuck's sake, Catherine's all about a man trying to deal between two women and the issues that come with it, and his personal integrity and feeling bad about the situation. I mean, literally, it's one long guilt trip of a game. Like, let's be serious here, and it's dealing with these struggles of growing up and maturing. So it makes it, like, the female characters, sure, even the male character is again, like King's Quest, made cartoon, but there's still these strong characters who are women. And even when people bring up the tropes between different, classes, and they just throw in a woman just because, it's really stupid. Shining Force had female characters who, some of which were way more powerful than male characters. Like, take for example, the first, like, 2 Centaur Knights you get in Shining Force are Ken and May. And May is 1,000 times better than Ken is. Ken gets more hit points, but May is more powerful in every other respect. And certainly has, like, more dignified lines. So it's strange whenever I hear that, because I'm so used to seeing things that are completely and totally opposite from that. Like, even like Gauntlet's female Valkyrie character is usually, like, in my honest opinion, more powerful than the male barbarian. The male barbarian is, like, the worst character, but I mean, let's be serious here. The only good character is the elf. And right now my fiance and I are playing Diablo 3. And Diablo 3, there's no difference between the male and female characters. They're just classes. Like, and you can choose your gender. That's it. Tons of MMOs have that, and sure, they might have scantily clad armor for women and, like, badass designed skull armor for men. But the male armor is just as much trope as a female armor. And the thing is whenever I play with my fiance, and whenever they get opinion polls about, which they like more, surprisingly, men usually like the badass, skull armor, and women seem to like the skimpy armor, as long as it's within reason. It's not, a K RPG where the woman's basically wearing, like, pasties and, a G-string and fighting. But the G-string has metal plate on it, and so do the nipple tassels. And the nipple tassels are chainmail. But those kind of things, like, they're usually considered appealing to people. And if you don't like that, play Diablo 3. Diablo 3 has characters that have both. Like, they both wear just about the same armor. It's not like the more advanced your armor gets, the skimpier it gets. It just looks more complete, has more detail, has more things. Like, they really focused hard on it to not make it this overly sexualized thing. And it has female characters in it that have very, like, generally deep stories and talk about things from a very personal level. Like, the Enchantress character is not some just like, I am so helpless, there's nothing I can do. I mean, she's like, I was chosen, I have a mission, I will fulfill my mission. Like, how is that seen as, like, a sexist portrayal at all? And I'm using, a very old classic game and a very modern game. And both of these are clear examples. If you use trope games or cartoon stylized games, of course you'll always win the argument, but that's the same thing as saying that all movies are sexist by only watching male on female porn, or only watching blowjob porn, for God's sakes. So, you can't equate things if you're looking in the wrong places intentionally. And as for, the whole idea that, video games create this, kind of strange rape culture or whatever, that's just weird. That's weird on so many levels, that I can't even begin and everybody goes nuts about the heavy rain. I've seen like 4 videos about how heavy rain creates rape culture and how it's like so inaccurate over like one dream sequence. I mean, it's supposed to represent the person's fears. It's a nightmare scene. Like that's what it's supposed to be jarring and uncomfortable. And I don't understand why the new one, the one that set me off on this rant in the first place, was bringing up The Last of Us as an example, even though like the female characters in that are absolutely top notch. I mean, they are. It's not that they're all like tough, grizzled women. They all have a general feeling. Everybody in that game feels like a real person, except for the people you're shooting. But I mean, most of them are like, "I'm gonna kill you," or "I'm gonna take everything that you have." So it makes sense that you really wouldn't build an emotional dialogue with your enemy. I mean, technically, one character in it I consider an enemy because he totally screws you over, and I would have shot him in the face after he did it. But that point aside, it's like the character Tess and Ellie, and I don't remember Joel's brother or his brother's fiance, wife, whatever's name. I don't remember either of their name because they're in the game for such a short time. But when they talk like a human couple, and they talk about things very realistically, and it's very, I don't know, it feels like they're real people, and I don't see why people avoid this or try to use Last of Us as a sexist example. And then the other thing is, when you take things out of context, suddenly it seems a whole lot more sexist. And of course it does. I mean, you could watch the scene where Catherine seduces Vincent, but there's a lot more underlying things in it that make it more interesting and more subtle, because if you don't understand the context of why she's seducing Vincent in the first place, you'll see it as sexist. But technically, I guess she's not really female. Not to be too spoilery. I mean, neither of them are really human, but it's out of context, it seems very sexist. And that's just weird. Like, I'm sorry, but I've had to deal with lots of years of video games assuming that we wanted every male character to be Duke Nukem or like Captain Badass, bad dudes, like ninjas have kidnapped the president. Like, sure, those are cool and all, but there are other games that avoid that kind of thing. Like, the fantasy trope is so common, where it's like super buff, rippled man, and then like short dwarf with a beard, and then like scantily clad female warrior. Like, Golden Axe is full of sexism on both sides, but because it's fantasy. And beyond that, the person with the most powerful magic, and frankly one of the better characters, is the female character. I mean, she has Overkill Dragon, so why is this like even an issue? And there are plenty of games that have great female leads. I mean, you consider that Portal is almost entirely a cast of women. Like, Wheatley is, in quote, male, but I mean, really, he's a robot, but he acts as male as I guess you could consider. But it's mostly like a female-dominated cast, so it's very strange to have like this idea of sexism thrown in. And I know that there are tropes, and there are games like Duke Nukem, but those are games that do it in a strangely funny way. Like, they aren't always power trips. It's like, the Man Show on Comedy Central. You wouldn't accuse Comedy Central of being entirely sexist because it had the Man Show on it. I didn't even like the Man Show, and I'm a man, and I thought it was rather unfunny. And those shows are meant to be so over the top that it becomes funny. Duke Nukem is the same way. It's so over the top. It's almost comical. It's like so funny it's stupid. Or so stupid it's funny. Whatever. Hold on. I need something to drink. And yes, there are some games that have, characters that are imbalanced because they're male or female, but honestly, I don't really think that those are good games. I mean, really, when you look at a lot of, like, take for example, Final Fantasy X, you get a lot of depth out of a character from Yuna. I mean, she's essentially a social child out in the world, and so is your main character. But people seem to always focus on how, in quote, helpless Yuna is. But, like, she's trying to do the right thing, and she's trying to do it the way she thinks that's the right thing, and you have an outsider telling you that that's not the right thing to do. And people seem to always think that it's like, she's such a damsel, and the wedding scene is such like a, you have to save her. It's like, no, she's doing something out of posterity, because she thinks it's the thing that will save lives and save people. She thinks she's doing the right thing. And whether it would be a good thing or not is really a catch-22. You'll never really know if it would actually do it, because it's a story. It's written a certain way, and that's it. But frankly, she's a strong character. I mean, she has her convictions. She starts her journey with the full intention that she's going to die to save lives, and that's a pretty powerful thing to begin with in a game in general. And when you consider that, like, one of the most powerful forces in a nation is a girl you meet who's overly sexualized at first, who, people always tend to like fall in love with, and I love her character for like the craziness of her character, is actually like one of the most absurdly intelligent, powerful, and interesting characters. But we like to throw that aside because she has a shirt that shows her belly. Ugh, I hate the word belly. Shows off her stomach. There we go. That's a better word. And there's a lot of games where sex doesn't matter and doesn't play a role at all in the game. There are some stories that are divinely female and ones that are divinely male, and really separating between the two is important. But you can't just decry sexism because somebody made Barbie horse adventures, and you think that that's like a standard for games for women. Like, I'm sorry, but like, girls that I know that play games, like, we played Tekken a lot. Tekken 3 was like a mind-blowingly amazing when it came out. At least when we all would sit around and play it on PlayStation. And the funny part is that most of the girls that we played with, who were actually pretty damn good at it, it wasn't like we gave them pity or passes and said like, oh yeah, blah blah blah. And some of them aren't button mashers. I went to a Tekken tournament, a Tekken Tag tournament, which wasn't that great. Oh no, it was Tekken 5. The Tekken Tag tournament I went to was terrible. I went to a Tekken 5 tournament, and I got second place, and the fourth place contestant was a girl. And it's not saying like, oh, she was bad because she was in fourth place. Out of like 10 girls out of like 40 guys to reach fourth place is a pretty good accomplishment. And she was not a button masher. She was like, I put my fingers up on the D-pad. I prefer to have a joystick. Like, it's like, but people like to divide that's like a gamer girl or whatever. But she never played, and most of the girls I know never played the female characters. The female characters weren't inserted in just because. They were inserted in because they filled, a character profile in fighting games. And sure, some of the, like, you could say that, oh, like Dead or Alive was so sexist, and, oh, fine, my sure and I, look at those humongous boobs, jiggling around. But then they miss out on, like, what, Shira? Or is that Bloody Roar? Who's like, a tough, kick-your-ass female that actually isn't like naked the whole time. She has like a tank top and full-size camo boots, and Sheena's the one from Playboy. Anyway, but we like to focus on the over-sexualized, again, cartooned characters as opposed to a more realistic character. I mean, you take over-sexualization in Tekken, and you've got, one character that's overly sexualized, which is probably, Nina and Anna. And those two, yes, are overly sexualized, but then there's, Ling Xiaoyu. There's Julia, who's the most obnoxious character in the world, just because I hate her stupid little jump punch. But it's not like I hate her because she's a woman, or because she's, like, a cheap character. Most girls I know didn't like using her. They didn't like the way her combos were set up, or didn't like the way she played, so that they would pick another character. I personally liked some of the faster women characters over the male characters, but that's because it's a player preference, not because, if you play a fighting game because you like the way a character looks, and that's why you play that character, you're an idiot, and you shouldn't be playing fighting games. You play fighting games for the character that's well suited to yourself. Like Soul Calibur, who people always love bringing up Ivy, but they always miss on characters like Sophitia. And, then they miss out on other really creepy, unrealistic characters like Voldo, who I don't even know what's going on with that. But with it, or even, like these overly muscly men in the game. There's like 4 overly muscle men, and then there's Ivy as the only like absurdly busty woman. But all the rest of the women look like normal, regular women, and have a drive, and have a personality, and have things that they want. So it's like you judge a game by a single character as opposed to all the depth of all the different characters that are in it, which is a really tragic thing to do. I mean, come on now. At the end of Tekken Tag, the last boss you fight is a female character who whoops the crap out of you. And that's kind of a thing is like, if you start looking at powerless women and you start looking for sexism, you'll find it wherever it is. It's like if you decide that the number 5 is the number that you're looking for, you will start seeing 5s everywhere. I'm sure you could say, oh, the movie number 23. But it's true. People make witches where there aren't witches. And people find 5s because they already have the predilection that there is going to be a 5. Or whatever. Yeah, predilection? I guess that's the right word. I don't remember. I'm tired. It's like 3:30 in the morning. But if you look for those things, you'll find it. And that's almost 100% guaranteed every single time. So if you start looking at video games and looking for these over-sexualized examples, and not focusing on who they are or who else surrounds their world, of course you're going to have a problem. But the problem is that you always have to scrape out or lie to get the answer that you want. And that's not the right thing to do. As a guy, I don't care about muscles, I don't care about huge boobs, I don't care about any of that. None of that stuff really bothers me. If you're an intelligent character who makes an interesting or valid point that makes me think about something, then I like you as a character. Characters like in Digital Devil Saga, I love like Angel's character, but people would probably focus on Sarah and how Sarah's like this weak kind of character. But Sarah's not a weak character. Sure, she has weak tendencies, but again, it's this the childlike character. Your lead character is childlike, and the in-quote love interest is also a childish character. That's a common trope. And that's okay. Because that's what that character, is supposed to be. But like characters like Angel, even Argilla, yeah, sure, she has her weakness or whatever, but it's also they're coming to terms with something larger, so it would make sense why she would break down into tears. And those kind of things make sense where other people are stern. But again, watch the Digital Devil Saga and watch it for the story, and you'd understand why these things happen the way they do. And it makes sense in the whole scope of the game. A lot of people say, like, oh, Ellie's crying scene in Last of Us, and Tomb Raider when she cries. Like, I'm sorry, but I went and watched the montage and the whole opening parts where she's struggling as a grad student and getting beaten up, and she breaks down and cries. I watched the show about the people who train to be SEALs and stuff like that, and there was, like, a 25-year-old guy, ripped as hell, getting out of the pool, bawling like an infant. Absolutely bawling like an infant. Because he had just been so physically beaten up and worn down and just emotionally haggard. And that's just what people will do. And to say that, like, Lara Croft, like, oh, breaking down because she's such a weak girl, that's why she did it, means that you've already gone into it with a sexist predilection, or with a predisposition that it's going to be sexist. And it's silly to jump at that, and you're not really focusing on the fact, or you've just never really, like, done enough physical exertion to the point where you're mentally and physically exhausted and you just feel like breaking down and crying. I mean, I've been at that point. I was in like a stupid camp for like 2 weeks where it was non-stop physical exhaustion, getting up at 4 in the morning, going to bed at like 1 in the morning, waking up again, and then working out all day, and then, oh my god, I thought I was going to die, and people were breaking down and crying and having all sorts of issues, and it was understandable because you're going through that much physical exhaustion. And if you didn't think that from her training montage and falling down and failing consistently and being exhausted wouldn't have her break down and cry a little bit, you obviously are a pampered person, and you've never lived a day of hardship, which is doubly reason to invalidate any real point you really have about sexism in video games, or really any point you have about anything, especially something so intriguing as that. And furthermore, like, I can maybe think of 3 or 4 games that actually have rape in it. And 3 of these games are Japanese games that are terrible, like School Days, or Raplay. But, I mean, those are geared for a fetish category. But as far as mainstream gaming goes, the whole point is when rape is usually brought into the situation, it's brought in as something to create anger or frustration, to create this violation of personal things, because you can only bash so many children's skulls in before people get tired of it. You have to take it to a next step to grip somebody emotionally, to bring that thing. You can only stab Eris in the stomach so many times before people get bored of it. You can only kill a favorite character so many times. And as games get more realistic and as time moves on, you have to move on to new subjects. But in no way does this facilitate a rape culture that it's okay. Like, even in Grand Theft Auto, you have to woo women before you can, or you can bang a prostitute. But really, I mean, prostitution is a job, not so much a violation or anything. It's using someone in a desperate situation, or someone who prefers getting money for doing little to nothing, into a situation where that's okay. And the others with the consensual things, it's actually a lot of work to have sex with someone in that. And it's even worse in games like Growlancer to try to actually get to the point where you can be knocking boots. It's not like you walk into the room or like, what is it, Fallout 2, I want to say, where you can do some pretty sick things. It's really rare to get to that kind of point or opportunity in a lot of games, and it's never break into the room and rape somebody. And it's usually meant as an emotional response, or it's met as like a creepy fetish response, but I've never seen a video game that glorifies rape in any way or creates, in quote, rape culture. And I think that that's just a buzzword that people use as a arcane denial of anything else. It's like, well, it creates rape culture. It promotes rape because this, and this clearly promote rape. And it's like, you know, I really don't think you have a good concept of the world of rape if you think video games in any way create rape culture. That's just weird. And as for people who make points or make profit off of pointing out the number 5 and things, I think that it's sick, and I think that they should have responsibility to apologize. And they should apologize because, yes, there are issues where maybe people aren't getting the games that they need. But instead of pointing out what's wrong with video games or what needs to change in video games, why don't you do real research and look for characters? Why don't you look and actually count? I would like to see a tabulated number of characters in games who are female, who are fleshed out, and versus the number of male or the number of elves and dwarves or trolls. I mean, I'm sure a troll somewhere is upset. I would really like to see consistent facts and numbers to back up the argument. Because there are plenty of strong ones. I mean, I can think of five strong characters who are girls, who fight, who are heroes in Advance Wars. I mean, even the smarter of the enemies is female. I mean, it's when people are really looking for it and they're getting paid for it, they don't want to listen to the reasonable point because they're too busy getting paid. And I think that too many non-video game people are getting involved in the argument. And as far as girls I know that are gamers, you know, I don't even really like the term gamers. I prefer girls who play video games, whether casually or otherwise. A lot of them really just don't give a shit if they're male or female or who they are. They just want to play a game. And if you aren't showing people the games that they may like maybe there's a game out there that really does glorify your ideal feminist values of what should be or what shouldn't be included in a video game in a way that's socially acceptable to have a female figure. Why not tell people to play this game? Because ultimately you're just telling people don't play video games because they're all sexist and they're terrible. As opposed to saying like, hey, I really liked the interaction of GLaDOS and I thought it was a really interesting female character. Hey, I really liked, some other character. I'm running out of things to think of, and specific ones, because I'm incredibly tired, and I've been ranting for half an hour. Here's a game that has this girl in it. Here's Super Metroid. Like, this girl kicks ass. Like, here's Metroid Prime. This girl kicks ass. Like, here's Primal. This girl kicks ass. It's one of those things where people just avoid the subject. They don't talk about the games that are good. They just like upping the bad. And it's like watching the news. It's just... It gets so tiring to just hear the bad press. Like, can't you just say something nice? Like, I downplay a lot of video games and talk about how a lot of video games are stupid or garbage or I don't like them or whatever. But I'm sure in the huge library of games, you can find more than enough games that have a strong female lead that you can recommend to people and say, yes, this is a game you should play. We should see more games like this. And just like my stream Greenlight, you have to vote for what games really work. And you have to buy games that really do flex this out. And, flesh out female characters and male characters and characters in general, if that's what you're into. But ultimately what it comes down to is, if you care that much about who's swinging a sword at who, you're not really a person who plays video games. You don't really care about video games. You're just looking to spread your noxious little opinion around and hope that it sticks. And I mean, this is the kind of stuff that I'm getting tired of. On my Facebook, I recently got defriended by someone because the idea that all your food is poison unless you buy it strictly from Trader Joe's and it has to be organic. Otherwise you'll die. You'll become fat, diabetic, and die instantly, is like the most moronic nonsense I've ever heard. And it's all, oh, well, why should I trust Wikipedia's sources when this blog said it? And blogs are clearly a more relevant location of facts than, these weird things that have numbers and letters all over them that are approved by some scientist I've never heard of who works for some university, supposedly. But this random blogger from Vegan True Health Fact and, what are they called? Damn. Oh, and Chemtrails blog is clearly a more valid credible source than, real information. And with video games, it doubly bothers me because that's been like a life passion for me. So, on Facebook I hear this kind of nonsense, and I guess it's kind of culminated to the point where I felt like I needed to rant on something, and video games are like the first thing I ever think of. And, really, sexism in video games is like such a ridiculous argument that it's just not even funny. I mean, when every other character is like a muscly hero who's always straight and white, for the most part, in video games, you can't really argue that there's a sexist edge to it, because all of the guy characters have been these overtly what men should be characters, which is just totally an untrue statement. And saying like, oh, she has nipple tassels on, I'm going to tell on the sexist police, doesn't really work out. If you have your own issues about sexism outside in reality, that's one thing, but when every other dude's a buff dude who can fight or know how to use a sword or do all these crazy aeronautic flips and shit, you're really not living in like a constrained reality. And these aren't the cartoon characters or like over the top characters. These are characters that are like one-dimensional male characters who are supposed to be this perfect idea, like, I love sports in America and I kick ass and chew bubblegum, is not really like a good standard. And a lot of people would be like, oh, well, women have it so much harder. No. Like, I will say that yes, there are some things that are much harder, but when it comes to these kind of sexist things, especially in society, I roll my eyes, because, like, I hate sports, and I've mentioned this many times, I really hate sports. All of it. Anything to do with it, I think it's stupid. And the other day, since I'm currently engaged, which my fiancé has more than enough words to say about sexism in video games, and how stupid it is, but, I mean, come on, fucking Borderlands, for God's sakes. She prefers the male characters, but anyway, we went to a wedding expo, and there was an Eagles game going on, and every place I went, they were like, "Oh, you must hate it to be here." Like, "Oh yeah, surrounded by beautiful women and free cake. This is like the worst thing that's ever happened to me. Like, oh, my life is terrible." And it's like this idea that a man can't enjoy being married. Like, I've had my bit of philandering, and, sleeping with one chick for the rest of my life doesn't bother me because I know I found the right person. But beyond that, it's also every single person was like, "Don't you wish you were at home watching the Eagles game? You know what the score on the Eagles game is? Because I'm stuck here." you know. And people would like avoid asking me anything or my opinion on anything. They'd be like, "Oh, did you want a piece of cake too? Did you want to try it? Oh, like your opinion mattered in this?" And it's so bizarre. Like, people will like, decry all these things about sexism, but then when the standard comes back, it's like, "Oh no, that's fine. That's fine that they said that. Oh, it's okay." And I think somehow it really bothered me. Well, I think it bothered me because it was very strange. And it was like there were so few guys there. And yes, there was a fair amount of guys there who seemed supportive or whatever, and who were actually legitimately interested in the weddings that they were about to have. But when I have people just saying all these things and like blatantly ignoring me like I don't exist in a room and stuff like that, I don't get all offended. It's just a thing. Like, the only thing that offended me is the assumption that I like sports or have any care and interest. Like, I'd rather be out having some brewskis with guys. I don't even really drink alcohol that much. And normally when I drink, it's with women. So, beyond that, it's like, you automatically assume that I have a 5, and that's it. Because you want to see a 5, and you expect me to be that. And that's not really who I am, or what I do. And the same could be said for girls who play video games. We always assume that girls who play video games want to play as girls, and they want girl stories, and they want girl things. Sometimes they just want to go into a dungeon, beat the crap out of some orcs, get a badass axe, and feel better. And to say that you need this character, you just can't have a game until it's added. A lot of guys play female characters, and a lot of girls play male characters. And this isn't like some penis envy thing or whatever, or like, secret transgender fantasies or whatever other labels people want to put on it. People just like the characters they like, whether they're male or female. They like the stories, they like the way the character plays, they like just the way the game plays. So, much in the same way that I went there and everybody assumed I like football, it's running under the assumption that girls as a whole can only like one thing and only want to play girl characters is ultimately like a sexist thing. Much in the same way that if somebody at my work, who's, like black or Mexican or something decried racism on me, it would be like, wouldn't you identifying me as white in the first place be racist? Like, identifying that we are different and saying, therefore, I'm treating you different because that's what people of other races do? Like, wouldn't that would mean that inherently you came into thinking of racism because you automatically assume that we're separate and we're different. Which is totally, I'll never understand that opinion, and I'll frankly never understand the sexist opinion. I think that people are people, and if you make money on it, and you make money on fear-mongering and ridiculousness, and assuming what people want out of video games, or saying that, "Oh, well, this just has to change because it doesn't fit in my little box of what I like," even though I
need a Kickstarter to pay for video games because I don't have any lexiconic knowledge of video games. I just happen to be a casual gamer who saw that there's sexism for, some half-winded college thesis written on a cocktail bar, like a fucking cocktail napkin. It doesn't add up, and it's just sensationalism and for the sake of sensationalism. And if you were an industry insider and you complained about something that's a common trope, or you complain that why do we only have maybe 10 genres of video games or 12 genres of video games, and that there needs to be a real change, that's understandable. If you, instead of saying what's bad about them, if you said what could be done to make them better, anything that would be more constructive would really be great. But I think that if you're doing the sensational exploitation and you're accusing other people with broad strokes, you should really, don't throw stones when you live in glass houses. Because really, that's really stupid. And years down the line, you'll probably be embarrassed looking back. And on top of that, all those poor people who put their Kickstarter money in it, and now you're sitting comfortably and being like, I live in pseudo-celebrity. It really is disgusting. And you basically make your sex look bad when you're saying that. And I'm not saying that creating responsible role models and bringing up the issue is bad. I'm saying that the biggest problem is that when you say it's a black and white issue, you've already ruined the issue because you're creating sides. And this isn't about sides, it's about creating experiences that people want, that people who play video games would want to have. And whether that's with a guy, girl, elf, orc, or whatever, I think that once you start making such a bizarre analogy and assuming that someone else is handicapped automatically in a video game is just sad. And you're a sad person, and people who believe you are just as sad. Or just misinformed. And, yeah, I've talked for almost an hour, and it's almost 4 in the morning now. So, I don't know. Sorry for pumping out another vlog, but that's all I got. But I will see you next time, and hopefully what will be an LP instead of a vlog. And leave anything in the comments if you have more to add, or would like to in-depth discuss more, or possibly construct a list of better ideas or video games that ultimately prove that whole idea is stupid. Or if you have games that you want to prove, and I'll laugh at you. So yeah, see you later.